Hello and good day everyone. Welcome to the 10th edition of Legal Insight. I'm glad to be back after Salah break. Today is Friday, the 27th day of March 2026. In this edition of the program, we are going to consider provisions of a particular law that is very essential for individuals, businesses, and companies to know and apply the provisions accordingly, or to be guided by the provisions of such law. Now, if you are a car dealer, or you deal in properties, or you are an estate agent, or you are a consultant, a tax consultant, or a general consultant, or you deal in precious metals such as gold or silver, or you own a hotel or a supermarket, then come close. This edition is for you. Now, this law that we are going to consider is known as Money Laundering Prevention and Prohibition Act 2022. Let us begin the discussion by looking at some of the salient provisions of the Act. The Act places restriction in respect of cash transaction. It is prohibited for an individual to make or receive cash payment in respect of a transaction exceeding 5 million naira. In the same vein, it is prohibited for a company to make or receive cash payment in respect of a transaction exceeding 10 million naira. What this means is, for any transaction that exceeds 5 million naira, for an individual, it has to go through a bank. Also, for a company, any transaction or payment exceeding 10 million naira, it has to go through a bank. Another highlight of the Act is the establishment of Special Control Unit Against Money Laundering, SCOMOL. SCOMOL is a unit established within the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, and one of the functions of SCOMOL is to register and certify designated non-financial businesses and professions. Who are those designated non-financial businesses and professions? They include supermarkets, hotels, hospitality outlets, dealers in precious metals, that's those that sell gold and silver, dealers in automobile, those that sell car, dealers of mechanized farming equipment, those that sell tractors and other farming equipment. It also includes real estate agents. It also covers consultancy company. So if you fall within any of the categories described as designated non-financial businesses and professions, you are expected to register with SCOMOL. Now, registration is free of charge and it is done on the website of EFCC. The requirement for registration for a company is certificate of incorporation, the memorandum and articles of association of the company, status report of the company, and followed by tax identification number of the company. Also include information of one contact person for the company. For a business name, it also requires certificate of registration, then the status report, and followed by the tax identification number of the business name. If you have this requirement, the registration is free of charge. You can simply log on to the website of EFCC and complete your registration. Upon registration, you receive SCOMOL certificate. Another highlight of the law is that for a transaction exceeding $1,000 or its equivalent, the designated non-financial business and profession is required to identify the customer by requiring him to fill a form and present his means of identification bearing his photograph. Now, such details of the transactions are to be kept in a register that will be forwarded to the SCOMOL, and such register must be kept for at least a period of 5 years. Now, failure to comply with these particular provisions of the law attracts a fine of 250,000 naira for each day that the crime or offense continues. In addition to the foregoing, if an individual that satisfies the definition of designated non-financial business and profession, receives a lodgement or transfer of an amount in excess of 5 million naira, such an individual must report the transaction to the SCOMOL. Likewise, if a company that satisfied the definition receive transfer or lodgement of an amount in excess of 10 million naira, the company must also report the transaction to SCOMOL within 7 days. Now, failure to report such transaction within the stipulated timeline is an offense, and on conviction a person can be liable to a fine of not less than 250,000 naira. Financial institution and designated non-financial business and profession are also required by the law to report suspicious transaction. The law has provided parameters for determining which transaction is a suspicious transaction. For instance, a transaction that has no economic sense can be identified as a suspicious transaction and must be reported. So, in conclusion, if you are a business owner or a company, it is important that you get a copy of Money Laundering Prevention and Prohibition Act 2022 and go through to make sure that how you are running your business or a company is not contrary to the provisions of the law. This brings us to the conclusion of this edition of the program. If you find this edition educating or educative in nature, stay tuned for more interesting edition, and thank you for watching.